Good afternoon, Congress. Welcome back to our third session, and thank you for joining us. This afternoon, we'll be taking debates on equality issues, including tackling structural racism and fighting back against the far right. We'll also be discussing how we end cutthroat and exploitative employment practice like fire and rehire. Margaret Beckett will be addressing us as a sororal delegate from the Labour Party this afternoon, and I'm pleased to be joined by Gloria Mills, General Council Member, on the platform. Hello, Gloria. Congress, we now move to our first debate of the afternoon. I will take Composite Motion 7, End Fire and Rehire, Redundancy Rights Now, and Motion 36, Support British Gas Workers, Oppose Fire and Rehire. I'll take them as one debate. Before we begin, can I respectfully remind all speakers in our debates, please to keep to time. There's 5 minutes for those moving motions and statements and 3 minutes for everyone else. If you're scheduled to speak and have not received a Zoom link, please contact your union delegation leader or Kevin Rowan in the GPC office as soon as possible. Please, could you make sure that your own name is displayed on your Zoom account so we're able to find you and bring you on screen. Once on Zoom, you will be asked whether you give permission for the host to unmute you, and please select yes. I call paragraph 3.1 and 3.2 and Composite Motion 7, End Fire and Rehire, Redundancy Rights Now. The General Council supports the Composite Motion. The Composite Motion will be moved by Sharon Graham from Unite and then seconded by Paddy Lillis from USDOR. Sharon, you're very, very welcome. Please move.
Thank you, Gail. Sharon Graham Unite, moving Composite 7. Chair Congress, fire and rehire is an abhorrence, a legal loophole used by bad bosses to cut labour costs under the cover of a global pandemic. It is one of the true scandals of our age. And Congress, let's remember what fire and rehire really is, what it actually means. Workers wake up one morning and have 45 days to accept slashed terms and conditions, or they're literally told to leave the company. Very often, there is absolutely no warning. This could mean them losing their homes and their families and children being forced to move away from friends and needed support. When British Airways attempted to fire and rehire 36,000 staff, they did so because they saw an opportunity to put long-held plans in place, plans they knew would never have been accepted, and they knew workers could not push back. Congress, many of the firms employing these tactics are doing so not out of necessity, but simply because they can. They thought, now is the time, this is the moment. British Airways had billions of pounds in reserve and absolutely no need to attack its own workforce. Go Ahead wanted to cut costs at their Manchester depot and saw a chance to do it. But now fire and rehire is fast moving from opportunism to standard practice. 1 in 10, Congress, 1 in 10 workers has been subject to fire and rehire. As the Composite demands, of course we must support all legislative efforts to ban this practice. We must support the bill, we must argue for increased consultation periods and better redundancy pay. But we have to remember a legislative campaign on its own will do nothing for the Weetabix staff about to go on strike. It will do nothing to get justice for the British gas engineers sacked for taking a stand. The law may not be changed for some time, if at all. Congress, we need action. Colleagues, I was elected on a mandate for change, an industrial mandate to refocus my union on jobs, pay and conditions. Not to step out of the political arena, of course not. Laws matter, they affect our lives. But to make building power at work the number one priority. Why? So that we can really move the politics from the grassroots up. And with Labour in opposition and a government reluctant to act, our response now has to be industrial. Our priority must be to coordinate a pushback at the workplace level. We've all shown that fire and rehire can be beaten. At British Airways, Unite stopped the worst of the cuts. At Go Northwest, we pushed the company back. At Synergy, the GMB defeated the employed. So we can and we can will more often if we fully commit to delivering and focusing at the workplace. It is true, depending on the circumstances, that strike action may not be enough. And this is why we have to share our resources and strategies so that we can together deliver these campaigns and give all of our members the best chance of winning. We have to build confidence. We must have serious coordination between us, not just in words, but in practical action. It is now time for us to make this change. It's time for a new industrial deal. It is time for us to focus on the workplace. No politicians are coming over the hill to save us. No Westminster project is going to deliver pay rises for our members or defend them. This is our job, and we need to do it ourselves. The set routine of policy demand, media release, and then a lobby has to end. We're running out of adjectives. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. The closures keep coming. The pay is still being attacked. We can't do what we've always done just because we've always done it. That's why I'd like us to sit down as a movement and really make some decisions together. Let's put all of our priorities on the table and see what we can do. Now's the time to be bold and not retreat. Now is the time for trade unions, for organising, for building unions, so that solidarity is more than just a word on a banner. Colleagues, let's remember what we're facing, and we know what's to come. We saw it after 2008. Emboldened employers, job cuts, suppression of pay, attacks on our reps, a mental health crisis in the workplace and beyond, and of course, fire and rehire. It is really time that we made a new deal with workers. It's time for the labour movement to be reborn. No more political tail wagging this industrial dog. Instead, a simple pledge to working people. We know what you want from us. You want trade unions to do what it says on the tin. So I say to you, give us your trust, and together we will defend your jobs. Help us build a movement, and together we will stop the cuts to your pay and conditions. Join a union and earn your own dignity at work. Congress, it is time for change. It's time for us to step up to the plate. It is now time to focus on the workplace. Congress, I move the composite. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. I call on Paddy Lillis from USDOR to second Composite Motion 7. Paddy, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks, Sharon. Paddy Lillis, USDOR, seconding the motion on ending fire and rehire and redundancy rights. Congress, the retail workforce is facing a crisis of devastating proportions. The sector was already facing huge structural difficulties before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and the pandemic has made things even tougher for retail businesses and for retail workers. So far this year, around 50 shops have closed every single day, leaving more and more of our high streets blemished with the scars of boarded up shops lying empty, as household retail names fall by the wayside and outlets close. And many more who have managed to stay open are cutting jobs through round after round of restructuring. This is a crisis spiralling out of control, with no sign of the government intervention that retail workers so desperately need. And far too many workers' jobs are in peril, and so are their terms and conditions. And it's no surprise that this government has stood by while workers' terms and conditions are eroded. Even the Prime Minister has agreed that the practice of fire and rehire is unacceptable, but his government has done nothing about it. This is another example of the difference that a Labour government can make at the next election. And right now, trade unions are fighting against this appalling practice in the workplaces and in the courts. And we will continue that fight, and we must fight for stronger redundancy rights too. Losing your job is devastating. It's even worse when you don't have adequate rights or training opportunities. And we need to join forces to campaign for better redundancy rights. The current legislation allows too many workers to fall through the cracks. We need to close a nonsensical loophole in collective consultation, a loophole that allows big employers to avoid consulting over thousands of redundancies simply because those workers are in locations with fewer than 20 employees. We must campaign for increased statutory redundancy pay to give workers a proper safety net. And we must campaign for a retraining budget for all workers given notice of redundancy, because they deserve the best of re-entering the workplace with as little disruption to their lives as possible. The package of measures outlined in this motion would offer increased reassurance and opportunity to workers when they need it most. As furlough support ends and we enter a period of great uncertainty for our economy and for working people, we must focus our efforts on campaigning for an end to fire and rehire and stronger redundancy rights. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Paddy. We have another speaker in this debate, so I call Dean Ismay from the GMB. You're welcome, Dean.
President, Conference, Dean Ismay speaking on behalf of GMB in support of Composite 7 and Fire and Rehire redundancy rights now. Conference, Fire and Rehire is a dirty bullying tactic. It wrecks lives and trashes the economy. GMB has seen it firsthand. Earlier this year, 500 loyal skilled British gas engineers were forced from their jobs because they refused to sign up for more hours for less pay. We saw men and women pushed from their lifelong vocations, but the company tried to cover up management failures by cutting its way out of the crisis. These very men and women bravely took industrial action and continued throughout the dispute to negotiate a way out of the mess the management had created. And I've personally been subjected to this horrific tactic as a rep in Asda during our Contract 6 dispute. Asda always maintained they were never going to force new contracts on us, which would totally change our ways of working, but as we learned, they could not be trusted with that promise. When I represented our members throughout this process, I saw how upset my colleagues were. So many were fearful that these new contracts would not only make their time beholden to the company, but also make them do jobs they were not trained to do. The business was so desperate for us all to sign the contract, they even visited people when they were ill and off work, and they visited people at their homes to ask them to sign. When they issued the dismissal notices to us, I felt so sick with worry. As a disabled worker, I felt utterly betrayed by the business. I was so stressed and I was so worried about my health. It is a humiliating process to go through. To be bullied and manipulated, taken on worse terms and conditions, or lose your job. It is a terrible decision to have to make as a worker. And employers must know that fire and rehire is wrong because they resort to desperate measures to get workers scared enough into signing. While we work to get fire and rehire onto the parliamentary agenda, our industrial responses must be bold. It is our job as trade unions to be empowering force for our members and all workers in the face of such dirty tactics. British Gas promised never to use this tactic again, but fire and rehire must be consigned everywhere to the dustbin of history where it belongs. We need this government to do what they have so far refused to do, listen to the people and end this Victorian workers' practice for good. Thank you, Conference. I support.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sharon, Paddy and Dean. I call motion 36, support British workers, oppose fire and rehire. The General Council support the composite motion. The motion will be moved by Charlie Gray on behalf of TUC Young Workers Conference and then seconded by Alex Graham from Unite. Charlie, you're very welcome.
President, Congress, Charlie Gray, GMB Union, moving motion 36, support British gas workers, oppose fire rehire, on behalf of the TUC Young Workers Conference. Congress, these past 18 months have been truly awful. We've been isolated away from friends and family, fearful of loved ones becoming ill and worried about losing our jobs. And for so many, those devastating prospects have become reality. From working on the shop floor of supermarkets, teaching both in person and over the internet, caring for those that have been hospitalised with and those that have lost their lives to coronavirus, to emptying our bins, delivery drivers, postal workers, care workers, and so many more than I have time to mention. We owe you all a real debt of gratitude. All of our key workers deserve a pay rise. rather than the real terms pay cut that they have received, as well as better rights at work, dignity and respect. But whilst key workers, our members, have been keeping this country going, bad bosses have been waiting in the wings, ready to use the pandemic as the excuse they've been looking for to sack workers and try and claw back trade union members' hard-won rights at work, our terms and conditions and our pay. During the British gas dispute, 43 days of strike action were taken. During those 43 days of action, many British gas workers spoke frankly about the future they faced. Congress, I want to speak about one of those British gas strikers, Paul. Paul spoke to BBC News about the mental health crisis that he and other British gas workers were dealing with, threatened with the sack if they didn't sign away their pay and their precious time with their families. He spoke about the stress and anxiety that they were going through about their futures. Paul spoke about the barbaric way that the workforce had been treated. I've seen testimony after testimony from these workers talking about how the mental health of the entire workforce has been decimated. Fire and rehire was a tactic used to cover the failures of the management, and in this dispute and in many others, it has been used as a strategy to completely undermine and attack trade union members. Congress, there were two people who could have easily stopped this disgraceful treatment of British gas workers. The first is Chris O'Shea, the CEO of Centrica, the British gas parent company. O'Shea said in February at the Biz Select Committee that he got dodgy legal advice on fire and rehire, but 2 months later, he still sacked those engineers. Congress, it continues to disgust me that whilst British gas engineers were volunteering to go into the homes of people that they knew had COVID-19 to do emergency work, Chris O'Shea was planning to rip up their terms and conditions. Frankly, vile. The second person who could have stopped the immoral fire and rehire tactics at British Gas was Boris Johnson. He admitted when the disgraceful tactics being used against British gas strikers were raised in Parliament that the government regard fire and hire as unacceptable. So, Congress, did the newly found sympathy from the Prime Minister for working people last long? As I'm sure you're unsurprised to hear, it did not. Johnson had a choice, a very simple choice, to back those very same British gas workers that had volunteered to go into the homes of those with COVID-19 or to side with bullying bosses. Again, unsurprisingly, Boris Johnson chose to back the bullying British gas boss, Chris O'Shea. At the end of the dispute, 500 highly skilled women and men lost their jobs with the company, taking with them thousands of years' worth of experience. Many British gas customers ripped up or didn't renew their contracts with the company, and the reputation of British Gas as a company lies in tatters. But not the reputation of British gas strikers. They showed their courage and they stood up for their jobs, their families, and so that never again in this country a worker can be threatened with fire and rehire, a fight that still continues. Congress, it is important to note that it has been some time since the motion was passed by the Young Workers' Conference. The motion sought support for workers at British Gas Centrica in their dispute with the company over plans to fire and rehire on worse terms and conditions. The issues raised in the motion are similar to those experienced by other affiliates in disputes during the pandemic, with employers seeking to undermine and worsen collectively bargained terms and conditions and other employment rights. There is a call for the TUC and affiliates to oppose the practice of fire and rehire, which is ongoing. The motion also asks for a webinar to be organised, which has already taken place, and for the TUC to write to the Centrica CEO. A settlement to the dispute has been reached since the motion was submitted, and further steps should be agreed in consultation with the unions who represent British gas workers. The TUC has supported efforts to fight against fire and rehire tactics, carrying out polling and media work, and providing resources for reps. This work will continue. I will finish with this, Congress. The trade union movement must continue to make the fight for this abhorrent practice. It's just another method for bosses to attack us. We welcome the work that the TUC and affiliated unions have done, not just to fight this practice head-on through strike action, but to educate and organise around it. Thank you, Congress. I move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. And I call on Alex Graham from Unite to second the motion, motion 36.
President, Congress, Alex Graham, Unite the Union and Chair of the Young Workers Forum, seconding motion 36. Congress, we've already heard from my General Secretary and all of the other fantastic speakers what a disgrace fire and rehire is. Sharon not only spoke about what it means in practice, but stress the urgency of taking action now on an issue that affects 1 in 5 young workers. This motion from the Young Workers Forum highlights the situation in British Gas and Unite supports those workers that were scandalously sacked for taking a stand. I'm a lawyer and I can't think of a single other area where a contract could be disregarded in that way. That's why Unite is supporting the private members bill to end fire and rehire that's been put forward by Barry Gardner, an MP that I was proud to work for. When the bill was first presented, Unite pointed out that fire and rehire is a practice that's outlawed in much of Europe, and it should be outlawed here as well. We also pointed out that Jacob Rees-Mogg, hardly someone that you'd describe as a raging socialist, called fire and rehire wrong, bad practice, and said that companies really should know better. And whilst we won't stop fighting for a change in the law to protect working people from this attack, we also know that we need to fight in the workplace. When Sharon spoke earlier, she gave examples of where fire and rehire has been taken on industrially. One of those examples is Go Northwest in Manchester. Here, after one of the country's longest running industrial disputes, Unite members, through their dedication, their solidarity and their commitment, defeated the attempt to fire and rehire them. Following a strike that lasted 82 days, the company agreed to Unite's demand not to use the tactic in any form, and the pay and conditions of thousands of employees were protected. Congress, both the Young Workers Forum and Unite are proud to support this motion's call for a campaign to outlaw fire and rehire, to raise public awareness and to educate trade unionists on what can be done to fight against this horrific tactic. Let's end the scandal of fire and rehire. Let's support Barry's bill and please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie and Alex, and all speakers in that debate. As there is no opposition, Composite Motion 7 and Motion 36 are carried. Congress, we now move to Section 5 of the General Council report, Winning More for Workers. I call paragraph 5.5 and Composite Motion 15, Defending and Supporting Union Reps and Winning Rights for Union Equality Reps. The General Council support the Composite Motion. The Composite Motion will be moved by Diana Holland from Unite and then seconded by Mick Lynch from RMT. Diana, if I can call you to move, please, Composite Motion 15, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. President, Congress, Diana Holland, Assistant General Secretary, Unite the Union, moving Composites 15, Defending and Supporting Union Reps and Winning Rights for Union Equality Reps. And let me say at the outset how proud we are in Unite that Gail Cartmel is this year's president of the TUC and that our new General Secretary has support from Unite members for putting bad employers on notice, equality on the bargaining agenda, and prioritising reps at the workplace, as called for in this motion. For millions and millions of workers, the shop steward or union rep at their workplace is the union. Thousands of trade union reps making a difference at work and beyond. And while we have some powerful examples of employers during COVID-19 who recognise the vital role of how vital union reps are to everyone's safety, jobs, pay, dignity and security, so too we have had other employers who have shamefully used the pandemic as an excuse and targeted reps for discipline, for redundancy and for unfair treatment. This motion calls for us to come together to send a strong, united message to those employers. You will not get away with it. We are organising together. An injury to one is an injury to all. But this motion goes further. It calls too for that same united union action to advance equality. As the suffragettes said, not just in word, but in deeds too. Negotiating now for union equality reps to be treated equally, to get paid time off, union education and facilities just like other reps, and to be there at the bargaining table. And for all of us to redouble the campaign for statutory rights for union equality reps to become a reality in all workplaces. And as our General Secretary Francis O'Grady said so powerfully earlier, COVID-19 has exposed the legacy of austerity and the deep searing underlying inequalities, which have cost lives, livelihoods, safety, job security, and well-being. COVID-19 has also shown just how vital union reps are. In aviation, when reps found that Black and disabled workers were disproportionately facing redundancy, the union stepped in to expose the discrimination and make things fairer. In health, reps identified how Black staff are disproportionately on the front line, being passed over for senior roles. And so we're supporting the action set out in the Snowy White Peaks report. In finance, we've exposed a huge gender pay gap, which we are pressurising the employers to close. And what about pay gaps faced by Black and Asian ethnic minorities, disabled and LGBT plus workers? They all require action. We've been learning from the ITF and transport unions globally, who've developed union women's advocates to support survivors of domestic abuse, violence, and harassment. We've acted on sexual harassment as a horrifying reality for LGBT plus workers too. And across sectors, we have challenged employers who ignored pregnant workers' rights to safety without loss of pay. We've negotiated for shielding disabled workers to be paid fairly rather than just minimum sick pay. And in road transport and logistics, Unite has called major employers together to support mental health and well-being. Workplace reps, including union equality reps, are at the heart of identifying these issues and at the heart of resolving them. Thinking of all the motions here at Congress, whatever the issue, we need a strong, diverse network of union reps to make them a reality. Not just for this week's safety issue, not just for this year's pay negotiations, but as a permanent fixture to protect and improve the lives of working people now and in the future. Workplace reps are the living, breathing presence of the union at work. Reps in each workplace do not stand in isolation. They are part of a movement, our movement. Please join in supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Diana. So I call on Mick Lynch from RMT to second composite motion 15. Mick, you're really welcome.
Thank you, President. Congress, in this motion, we rightly pay tribute to our wonderful lay rank and file reps and shop stewards, the everyday face and voice of the unions in the workplace across the country. It is those reps that have kept this union, kept the union show on the road during the crisis. And this crisis has demonstrated it must be our reps that are our priority. We need to support these reps because it is they, those rank and file members, representing workers in the workplace, that are critical to rebuilding the union organisation, organising, growing and regenerating this trade union movement in the days ahead. And it's they that will lead the fight back that we need going forward. But there is a developing trend of victimising and attacking our reps on spurious grounds precisely because they've been so successful. There is fire and no rehire for many of our reps. And in many ways, this is a counterpart and a complement to the previous debate and composite. My union is an industrial union, and we cannot wait for the politicians. We see no signs from the Labour Party that they're going to wake up to the needs of working people across this country. We're seeing an insipid and weak opposition. And it'll be interesting tomorrow when Keir Starmer addresses us whether he commits to rolling back the anti-trade union laws and putting in legislation that this resolution calls for to defend our reps and giving them statutory rights that ensure that no worker is exploited or dismissed because they stand up for their colleagues and are their voice. So that means that the TUC has got a campaign. We've got a campaign for changes in law to substantially increase those protections of reps. But we can't just wait for that. The TUC and the joint trade unions need to campaign on behalf of our representatives in the workplace. And we need to ensure that we coordinate that defence, and where necessary, we take collective industrial action in support of our members who put their heads above the parapet to be the voice of their colleagues. If we can't defend our people, our lay reps and shop stewards, who is going to join us? So we call on the Labour Party, we call on the politicians, we call on the legislators. Protect our people, give them power, give them more statutory rights, and defend them from the employers. In the meantime, Congress, the TUC, we must resolve to defend our people, to make sure that they, the lifeblood of this movement, are protected. Please support Composite 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mick. I'm now going to call another speaker in this debate, Katie Harwood from the Royal College of Podiatrists. Katie, you're really welcome.
Thank you. President Congress, Katie Harwood, Royal College of Podiatry, supporting Composite 15. We welcome the original and much needed motions from Unite and the RMT. Our workplace representatives of all types are our lifeblood, and we need to do all we can to support them, give them the tools to undertake their roles and defend them when necessary. As we've heard already at conference, there are many inequalities within society and the workforce, and COVID-19 has only compounded this. We want to comment specifically on the equality reps area today. The college has been working as part of its Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee to expand the number of equality reps we have across our workplaces, both in the NHS and in the private sector. There is much need for these reps, yet they have no protection in law, meaning they often encounter resistance to paid time off to attend training, or assist members often hearing, well, can't the TU rep do that? They also do not have the same access to established training routes as TU and health and safety reps. Whilst the TUC and unions provide various courses which cover subjects such as maternity discrimination, there are few equality courses that are not held as regularly or as widespread as other trainings, such as the regular health and safety reps training stages. A full equality training framework would enable this training to be pulled together and strengthened. By doing this, we will ensure equality reps have the specialist knowledge and skills to enable them not only to defend members who are facing discrimination, but also empower them to lead and organise within their workplaces so inequalities are challenged and addressed at the earliest opportunity, and encourage employers to make equality and diversity part of mainstream collective bargaining to ensure that every worker receives fair treatment, irrespective of gender, race, disability, religion, age, gender reassignment, or sexuality. For our equality reps to have the full impact that they need support and training. They need to have the same legal protection as other reps. So let's start by giving all our reps equal status. That's why we're asking the TUC to develop proper training frameworks that will help our equality reps deliver change for the better for all members. Please support this composite.
Thank you very much, Katie, and before you, Diana and Mick. As there's no opposition, the composite motion is carried. Colleagues, we now come to our debate on equalities from section 3 of the General Council report, Respect and Voice at Work. I will take the General Council statement on our anti-racism task force, composite motion 10, tackling structural racism, inequalities and ethnicity pay gap in medicine following the COVID-19 pandemic, paragraphs 3.4 to 3.6 of the General Council report, and motion 45 as one debate, all of the above as one debate. First, I will call Patrick Roach to move the General Council statement and Gloria Mills to second, Then I will call the mover, seconder and supporters of Composite Motion 10 and the mover and seconder of Motion 45 in that order. Patrick, you're very welcome indeed.
Thank you very much, President, Congress. On behalf of the General Council, I'm proud to be moving this statement on taking forward the work of the TUC's Anti-Racism Task Force. And I want to start by acknowledging the contribution made by members of the task force, the Black Workers Conference and TUC Equalities Committees for their active support, input and leadership. Congress, during the pandemic, we've seen how our trade unions have been a vital lifeline for working people, black and white, securing safer workplaces, resisting unacceptable employer practices, and protecting jobs and incomes of workers during the pandemic. We've also seen how the pandemic has exposed a racial justice emergency to which our movement has also responded. But Congress, we know that there's more for us to do. The facts speak for themselves. Black workers have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic, more likely to contract the virus, more likely to lose their jobs, and more likely to die as a result of doing their jobs. Structural inequality holding back black workers, women, and disabled workers. Labour market casualisation, lack of robust regulation, and the outsourcing and subcontracting of many jobs has contributed directly to racialised employment segregation, job insecurity, and worker exploitation. Across the board, the unemployment rate for black workers is rising fastest, 2 times faster than the unemployment rate for white workers. Black workers disproportionately impacted by the government's public sector pay freeze and the failure to tackle race pay gaps. Discrimination is the everyday reality for many black workers. Now, these are the facts, not hype, not a figment of the imagination. This is the evidence today of a labour market that is failing all workers. And our anti-racism task force was established not only to tell us the facts, but to be a force for action, drawing on the active leadership of our trade unions as we step up our campaigning in our workplaces, in our movement, and across the labour market. Because our unions can never and will never stand by while any worker, black or white, cleaner, shop worker or postal worker, healthcare or transport worker, teacher or footballer is a victim of racism when they're doing their job. When workers are exploited by 0 hours contracts, low pay and injustice at work, we step up. When employers outsource jobs or fire and rehire their workers, spreading fear, driving down pay, and attacking our members' pensions and rights at work, we step in. And when any worker faces discrimination, bullying, or injustice at work, again, we must be vocal, we must be visible, and we must act. And I'm proud that in our first year, through the task force, we have set about countering the government's false narrative and calling them out on their actions. And as we move into our second year, the Anti-Racism Task Force will be focused on action across our movement, joining together workers and communities to challenge division and inequality and leading the fight back against the government's hostile environment, putting race equality back at the top of our bargaining agenda to demand change that benefits all workers. We'll be organising, working with affiliates across all regions to secure the next generation of black activists and trade union leaders, ensuring our unions look and sound even more like the members we represent, and ensuring our reps have the tools and the confidence they need to negotiate successfully for racial justice at work. We'll be inviting all affiliates to put racial justice front and centre of your own work as employers, demonstrating our capacity to lead by example in building inclusive and safe workplaces for all. And we'll be working together as a movement to ensure that the experiences of black workers are front and centre of our response to the independent public inquiry into the government's mishandling of the pandemic. We'll be demanding answers and that lessons are learned. Congress, This will take the effort of the whole of our movement. But now is the time for us to mobilise, to organise for racial justice at work, the time for our unions to come together, to lead the change, to step up our anti-racist campaigning, our actions and our resolve to secure racial justice, dignity and respect at work, and to hold the government and employers to account. I move the General Council statement.
Thank you, Patrick. I now ask Gloria Mills to second the statement. Gloria, you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, President, and thank you to the TUC Race Relations Committee and the Anti-Racism Task Force. I want to say on behalf of the Race Relations Committee that I'm pleased to be seconding the General Council statement, to thank Francis and Patrick for their leadership in this, and also to put on record our thanks to Lester Holloway for the excellent start he and Kudsia and her team at the TUC have done in terms of getting us to this stage. But Congress, the Race Relations Committee, whilst we are delighted to be spearheading in conjunction with the Anti-Racism Task Force this work, we are also pushing for more to be done, to build 100% union organization and density in all workplaces and in our sectors, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. No sector will be exempt, because we have to organize in order to stop the 40 years of leveling down, systematic racist leveling down of our jobs and sectors, where black workers' jobs, the areas where they work, and low-paid working class workers, their jobs have systematically been outsourced, privatized, and what we have seen is that in-work poverty is now so endemic that people cannot feed their families. We have seen privatization impoverishing our workers and our members and our communities. And we have seen that the leveling down by this government, and it's 40 years of Tory leveling down, what we have seen is that it has left people in a very, very dire state of desperation. But we, in the trade union movement, we exist to stop the unfettered control of management and abuse of management power. We are here to stop corporate Britain from exploiting workers at their will. What we are doing is we are fighting back, and we are fighting back stronger, because we are tackling the ethnicity pay gap. It's a scandal that must end, because what we know is that in London, black workers are paid 23.8% less, in Yorkshire and Humberside 12.8%, and in Scotland almost 11%. Regional as well as racial disparities across the board is actually dividing people along racial lines and workers around racial lines. And I want to say this, when black workers benefit, everyone benefit. This fight is for black and white workers, the working class, everyone who want to invest in their future, need to join a trade union, need to organize, need to be negotiating with their employers to remove these huge structural inequalities, occupational and vertical segregation of the workforce, segregation by gender and race. And we are seeing what's happening in the care sector, where people are working without a future, without any career progression, without proper pay and without proper pension. And we know black workers are cheated out of £3.2 billion each year because of the racial ethnicity pay gap, and that's the Resolution Foundation report. The McGregor-Smith report revealed the economy loses £25 billion because black workers are not working to their full potential. So we are challenging and holding the government to account on race and on equality issues, and we will hold employers to account as well. And we want to say to corporate Britain, we will not allow £130 billion of taxpayers' money, our taxpayers' money, money to be given to organizations and corporate organizations that do not recognize trade union, that do not recognize collective bargaining, and continue to discriminate on the basis of gender, on race, on sexuality, and also on disability, and discriminate against young workers. So we will demand that the Equality Act 2010 and the Public Sector Equality Duty is implemented and is enforced for organizations providing public services. They're covered to ensure that they do not discriminate, and we will make sure that we hold them to account on this, and we will be holding the government to account and employers. We will put race back on the agenda, we will put equality back on the negotiating agenda, and we will rebuild this trade union movement with 100% density, where we have the strength in power and the strength in numbers to actually have a better future in this country. So thank you very much, Congress. This is the first year of our report. We will come back with the strategy, the action plan, and the route map to show how we are going to do it. So we give notice to corporate Britain and to the government. Get your house in order, and to the enforcement bodies as well. We expect you to do the job as it's set out in the legislation. There'll be no free pass for anyone on racial discrimination and inequality in Britain today. So thank you, Congress.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Gloria. That was great. Now we move to our motions. I call paragraphs 3.4 to 3.6 and composite motion 10, tackling structural racism, inequalities and ethnicity pay gap in medicine following the COVID-19 pandemic. The General Council is supporting the composite motion. The composite motion will be moved by Kebe Mane from Unison, then seconded by Sue Pike from the Royal College of Podiatrists. Kebe, you are very welcome. Please move.
Thank you, President. Good afternoon, Congress. Keba Mane, Chair, Unison National Black Workers Committee. And on behalf of Unison, I am honored to move motion 42, tackling structural racism in the workplace, which is now composite 10. I am a frontline NHS worker, and I am proud to work for the NHS. Congress, on behalf of the entire Unison family, we pay heartfelt condolences to the families and friends of our brothers and sisters who lost their lives due to COVID-19 in UK and across the world. Congress, life experience of structural, systemic, and institutionalized racism is a daily experience for many of us Black and migrant workers at the workplaces across the UK. Can you imagine going to work kind of half expecting that you may be racially abused for simply doing your job? If you are lucky, and if you are not lucky enough, then you get physically, racially aggravated, assaulted. That's exactly what has happened to a Black nurse I have been representing at the workplace, and the case is currently going through the court, Congress. Congress Unison survey of Black workers in social care found 46% experienced racism at the workplace in the previous year. TUC own research also exposed the overrepresentation of Black and migrant workers in secure work, being twice as likely as white workers to be in agency work and more likely to be on 0-hour and temporal contract. Congress, the tragic death toll of Black and migrant workers during the pandemic should have renewed our collective commitment to tackle racism. We can't be blinded or hoodwinked to racism that exists at the workplace and in society. We have moral obligation to tackle it, but instead, the government minimized the reality of our lived experience of racism and dismissed the structural, systemic, institutionalized racism without any moral justification. Congress, let us understand what's racism and how structure systematically and institutionally has a business entity. racism was a big business in the 16th century. The return on investment built our cities such as London, Liverpool, Bristol, Glasgow, Cardiff, to name but few. Today, racism is worth billions of pounds. Hence, the government will continue to support racism as business as usual without any moral compasses apart from the return on investment. Congress, according to British Museum records, in 1562, the British government commissioned and encouraged John Hawkins and Francis Drake to engage in the slave trade business. Thus, the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, and slavery was exported to the Americas as well as the rest of the British Empire and colonies, thereby initiating a cognitive racial hierarchy as a foundation tool and justification to control and maintain power over enslaved Black people as a commodity of capital. Congress, the return on investment was so profitable that even men of God partake in the slavery business, inevitably gave back to the ideology of free market and the ability to buy and sell people as goods at profit. Racism is the byproduct of slavery and colonial prosperity. And let's be clear, tackling a more than £1 billion profitable business will be a massive challenge for us all. Hence, Congress, we in unison call on the General Council to take the higher moral ground and produce resources to support the work of trade unions. We also call on the General Council to challenge the government's attempt to use the Commission on Race and Disparity report to dilute and repress efforts to tackle the structural, systemic, and institutionalized racism that continue to be lived experience of many Black and migrant workers across UK. Congress, please support this motion and the composite, and I move. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much indeed, Keba. That was great. Can I call on Sue Pike from the Royal College of Podiatrists, please, to second composite motion 10. Sue, you're very welcome.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Congress. Sue Pike from the Royal College of Podiatry, seconding composite 10. The pandemic has highlighted inequalities throughout society, in healthcare, the workplace, education, on jobs, socio-economic impacts, and far more. Inequalities in health have existed for many decades, becoming even more apparent during the pandemic. Individuals from Black and minority ethnic groups, poorer socio-economic backgrounds, urban and rurally deprived locations, and our vulnerable groups of society suffering the full force of its effects. The Royal College has seen these impacts on its own members, as I am sure you all have too. Our membership is predominantly female, with parents having to juggle work, childcare, and homeschooling. Members who have been pregnant or on maternity leave during the pandemic have felt removed from the front line, isolated, unsupported due to the risks and restrictions put in place. Working members have experienced issues with correctly fitting PPE, as the industry template is based on the dimensions of a male. Anyone outside of these norms find face masks do not fit properly or coveralls are way too big or small, leaving our staff feeling vulnerable without adequate protection. Culturally diverse members have difficulties accessing alternative PPE when beards, hair, turbans, hijabs have not been taken into account, making them feel awkward and unsafe, with managers requesting them to shave, restyle, or take it off, rather than looking for alternative solutions. Disabled members have juggled their needs to work while shielding and not being eligible for the benefits offered by the government because they are self-employed or newly qualified. Our LGBTQ+ members have faced lockdown away from their supportive communities, often in environments of prejudice. These are just a few examples. I'm sure you can all think of many more. There are, of course, good initiatives. The Royal College, along with other allied health professional trade unions, recently wrote to the Welsh Government, calling for leadership from boards and local authorities, asking them to collect data which could be used to support racial equality where there are currently gaps. The Chief Allied Health Professions Office for England is in the process of establishing a BAME Strategic Advisory Forum to provide specific focus on race, equality, influencing, supporting and advising on the implementation and delivery of strategies, policies and practice that impact on BAME staff and the communities they serve. Driving actions that will improve the diversity of the workforce and the experience of our BAME colleagues. Of course, these are drops in the ocean compared to the scale of inequalities we face. We need a cross-government strategy to reduce health inequalities, increase investment in prevention and public health, tackle the underlying social economic inequalities at the root of preventable ill health and mortality. Without this, we cannot tackle the endemic issue within our society. Therefore, I ask please support this composite. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. We have 3 other speakers in support. So first up is Paul Donaldson from the HCSA. Paul, you're very welcome. Paul, you're on mute.
I'm not on mute. I don't know.
You're not on mute now, Paul. So do please, you're very welcome to support the Composite 10.
Yeah, I had to change from unmute to mute to get unmuted. Right, Madam President, Congress, Paul Donaldson, General Secretary of HCSA, the Hospital Doctors Union. The HCSA would support the observations and the comments of all the previous speakers. What I need to do now is to highlight how this affects hospital doctors. Those working in the NHS have long recognised the failures of many ethnic minority doctors to progress, and that a disproportionate number of them are under disciplinary proceedings, including a greater referral rate to the GMC regulator compared to their white counterparts. Many of the issues involved have been recently documented in the 2020 Medical Workforce Race Equality Standard Report, which is the doctor's version of the Workforce Race Equality Standard. It documents the different experiences of white and black and ethnic minority staff in the NHS and aims to provide guidance on how to achieve better race equality in the workforce. Congress, I'm sorry to say that it makes for harrowing reading. The evidence from medical staff supports this accusation, one levelled by HCSA, that the blight of institutional racism is all too common in our NHS. There are striking similarities within medicine between the barriers around gender and around ethnicity. The Mend the Gap review into the gender pay gap in medicine provided a forensic analysis of the problems and factors involved and, crucially, offered a raft of proposals to close it. A similar process focusing on the ethnicity pay gap, which HCSA has repeatedly called for, is long overdue. We need to shine light on the significant detriment which many ethnic minority doctors face, which makes success all the more difficult. We need more than positive noises and lip service. We need concrete recommendations to end this disgraceful situation. HCSA are proud that our original motion has been incorporated whole into this composite motion, and I urge you all for your full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. The next supporter is Tanji China from GMB. Tanji, you're welcome.
Thank you, President, Congress. Tanji China speaking on behalf of the GMB in support of Composite 10. Congress President, before I move into the support of this motion, I would like to use the opportunity to invite you all to take some time out today to remember Stephen Lawrence, who, had he not been murdered by racists, would have been 47 years old today. As trade unionists, we remember Stephen Lawrence and his legacy and fight against institutional racism. So thank you. Congress, structural racism exists. It's the lived experiences of millions of Black and minority ethnic workers. We're paid less. We're more likely to be in high risk and insecure work. were more likely to be exposed to COVID-19. The virus does not discriminate, but our society, our economy, our institutions do. Yet this government has not just dismissed the concept of structural or institutional racism, they've dismissed the very fight against racial inequality as fashionable. The names of the workers that we saw who died reflects the inequalities that shamefully still exist. Black and minority ethnic workers have been the backbone of our frontline services for many decades. We're still underpaid, underrepresented, and discriminated against. GMB is proud to represent thousands of NHS workers, from porters to cleaners to ambulance workers. But like many employers, when the virus hit, the NHS was late to undertake individual risk assessments. And it's no wonder a GMB survey found last year that 1 in 4 Black and minority workers had not been given the necessary PPE, and more than half had not received an individual risk assessment. Congress is a shaming indictment that in some parts of the UK, Black and minority ethnic workers are paid a quarter less than other colleagues. In the NHS, Black workers are paid 16% to 7% less than white workers. And in social care, Congress, Black and ethnic workers are more likely to work in low-paid roles. So mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting should be one important step towards tackling the structural bias and dismantling institutional racism. This government must now take tough action against discriminatory employers and work with us on a comprehensive plan to address the structural causes of unequal treatment in our society. Because we don't sit and wait, Congress, we take action. So please support this motion. Thank you, and solidarity.
Thank you very much, Tanji. Our final supporting speaker in this session is Sian Caulfield from the CSP. Sian, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Conference, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to every key worker, particularly those working within the NHS, who have helped to keep our country running over the past 18 months. I also want to extend my solidarity with all Black workers who have experienced a deeper pain during this very difficult period in history. Structural racism is a feature of the social, economic, and political systems in which we all exist. The UK is a country with deep-rooted structural racism. This has been evidenced across all areas of society, from unequal access to education and employment, the online abuse of footballers, to killings and racist attacks. We also see long-standing structural racism in the workplace. Written within the NHS Constitution is a commitment to social duty and equality, alongside the right for staff to have a good working environment and to be treated fairly, equally, and free from discrimination. Yet we know that bullying and harassment, fewer development opportunities, and being significantly less likely to be able to work from home all affect more Black NHS staff than white NHS staff. The NHS is the UK's largest employer of Black workers. Evidence has shown that NHS staff infection from COVID was overwhelmingly due to occupational exposure, with a disproportionate number of Black staff working in patient-facing services with poor access to personal protective equipment. These are just some of the examples of structural racism as it exists today within the NHS and wider society. The CSP, along with many other trade unions, are committed to tackling these issues. We have dedicated much of the past 18 months to creating and delivering anti-racism training to our workplace reps, empowering them to challenge racist attitudes, policies, and discrimination at work. In collaboration with CSP members who have direct insight or experience of discrimination, we have written an equity, diversity, and belonging strategy with an aim to counter discrimination and to create a sense of belonging for all CSP members and staff. Congress, we must step up our commitment. It will take all of our collective efforts. By supporting this motion, we are sending a clear message of solidarity. We stand with you. We will put an end to workplace structural racism. Congress, I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you very much, Sian, and thank you to all speakers. I'm now going to call motion 45, tackling the widespread epidemic of structural and systematic racism. The General Council support the motion. The motion will be moved by Susan Matthews on behalf of the TUC Black Workers Conference and then seconded by Zita Holborn from PCS. Susan, I welcome you to move motion 45. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President Congress. My name is Susan Matthews. I'm Unite the Union representative. I'm moving this motion 45 on behalf of the TUC Black Workers Conference. This coronavirus pandemic have opened a lot and exposed a lot over the last year and a half, coming up to 2 years, following the death of George Floyd. It had prompted a lot of racial justice movement globally, not just locally, but on a global scale. This has also exposed an intergenerational systematic racism practice that have been happening right across the globe. The Black Lives Matter movement also raises concern on the systematic and structural racism that most importantly, that highlighted the various systems that Black workers have been experiencing over the last decades. And not only that, the outcome from the systematic approach. You just have to look at the level of the BAM and Black who died over the course of the pandemic and still continue to happen. And we're not just only looking here, but globally in terms of the Commonwealth country, in terms of the countries they call third world countries. We just have to look at the impact from this coronavirus on Black workers. Conference, systematic and structural racism occur and take up all different formats and all different shapes. The structural power of systematic racism involves more constitute of power of actors within the system. We just have to look at the education system. We just have to look at the health system. We need to look at the housing system, where these constitute of power impacted on Black workers, leading to a lot of exclusion and misinformation, where the systematic impact that happened on Black workers. It has also been a year of uncertainty. As trade union, we need to adapt the changes proactively and reactively in the current landscape for all workers, as well as Black workers, to achieve a fairness for all workers. When we achieve fairness for all workers, then it will produce good workers in terms of supporting the Black workers. As trade unionists, we need to achieve more inclusion and equity in terms of to tackle the structural and systematic racism and institutional racism while addressing inequality. Keeping equality and diversity and inclusion central to all organization structure, aim, and objective will enable us as trade union to address the social injustice and racial inequality that we currently face in society. Conference, I won't repeat a lot of what is written in the motion because it's self-explanatory. However, what I will say, conference, we call for no more convenient action. We call for proactive action with what is happening with the Black workers in today's society. Conference, we're looking to make sure and ensure that we combat racism. This government has lead a political resilience against Black workers over the period of decades. Conference, we just have to listen to the statement that this Prime Minister had stated in terms of wanting workers, low-paid workers to die in this pandemic, and loose mouth in terms of how we address workers and get away with it. No accountability. It goes to show you the kind of lenience they have in terms of worker throughout this pandemic. Conference, the Black Workers Conference is calling on support and proactively support in terms of where we go and eliminate the systematic and institutional racism. And I will reinforce this again to say that equality, diversity, aims and objective in the workplace is very important. And this is where we will be holding organization to account. Conference, please support this motion. I move. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. I now call on Zita Holborn from PCS to second motion 45. Zita, you're very welcome.
Greetings, President, Congress, Zita Holborn, PCS and TUC Race Relations Committee, seconding motion 45. Centuries and decades of oppression, discrimination and injustice and the legacies of colonialism and enslavement have led to our collective lived everyday experience of institutional, systemic and structural racism. Over a decade of austerity disproportionately impacting on us is why Black people have contracted and died of COVID. It's why Black people have lost their jobs disproportionately during the pandemic. It's why we experience disproportionate deaths at the hands of the state. It's why the Windrush scandal happened and why the majority of people impacted still haven't received compensation. It's why charter planes were organised by the government weekly over the summer to deport Black people to countries they do not know and left when they were small children. It's why we face discrimination in education and employment, why we face racist abuse on our streets, why we experience poverty and deprivation, why our life chances are reduced. So we don't need any more government reports or investigations to tell us what we already know, breathe, live, cry through, die through, resist and fight every day, that racism exists. It's not evidence of racism that's needed, but an end to racism in our lifetime as well as for future generations. The trade union movement has a crucial role to play. It must listen to and acknowledge our voices, we who have lived experience and have to tackle racism head on, not out of choice, but because we have no choice. We have Black structures in the trade union movement to create safe spaces for Black workers to organise, but we need all trade unions, workplaces and institutions to be safe spaces too. I commend the work of the Black curriculum in establishing a social enterprise to address the lack of Black British history in the curriculum. I co-led with OBV and others the successful campaign to keep Mary Seacole and Oluwade Equiano on the curriculum, but neither should be necessary. What we needed and still need is more, and our history to be told in a truthful way which honours the memories, sacrifices and achievements of our ancestors. I'm proud to be part of UNESCO's Coalition of Artists for the General History of Africa, working to promote the volumes of the history of Africa, as UNESCO recognised that knowing our history plays an important role for young Black people in providing knowledge, pride and strength in countering racism. This is why history, who tells it, how, is important. There's an African proverb, until the lion has its own historian, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. As Black people, we need to be able to cross borders for work without being racially profiled. We also need safe passage when fleeing persecution, conflict, poverty, and the impacts of climate change from the global south. Our voices in all aspects of public life are crucial to challenging racism, and that must include trade union structures. Visibility is also important in inspiring and encouraging others. Equality impact assessments have become a tick box exercise in the public sector. So action must be taken to hold public institutions accountable, but we need all sectors to practice race equality. We've seen outsourced and privatised sectors guilty of racism, with Black people first out the door when it comes to redundancy and cuts, underpaid, undervalued. Our PCS members in the culture sector and facility management workers, disproportionately Black, have had to take strike action and protest during the pandemic because of the way they've been treated. But enforcement bodies such as the EHRC must be properly resourced to carry out enforcement work. To end, Black Lives Matter isn't just a hashtag, it's not a catchphrase, it's a declaration, a cry of anguish, but also of determination. It is a statement that we should not still, in 2021, need to declare. Because if our lives have mattered through centuries of oppression, decades of discrimination, and daily microaggressions, we would not need to say Black Lives Matter. I second.
Thank you very much to Susan and to Zita and to all speakers in that debate. As there is no opposition, the General Council statement, composite motion 10 and motion 45 are carried. I call motion 48, COVID-19, Equality Impact Assessments now. The General Council support the motion. The motion will be moved by Jane Stewart on behalf of the TUC Women's Conference and then seconded by Naomi Poll from the Musicians Union. Jane Stewart, on behalf of the TUC Women's Conference, I invite you to move, and you're of course very welcome.
Jane Stewart, move motion 48 on behalf of the TUC Women's Conference. I'm really proud to be moving this motion when Unite has its first ever woman General Secretary, Sharon Graham. And of course, the double bonuses, Gail Cartmail as our president of the TUC this year. I want to thank Gail for the fabulous speech she gave yesterday. But I want to thank Gail for the years and years of counsel she's given me. I couldn't have done it without your sister. Congress. When the pandemic hit, it hit women hardest. Women bore the brunt of austerity, already working longer hours and even longer time since our pensions have been stolen. We are far more likely to be working multiple jobs without job security while juggling childcare, elder care, and relying on universal credit, which has proved very little relief. In the eye of the storm, we reached out to each other to ensure our neighbours, our communities were fed and looked after, working in essential services, working from home, doing homeschooling, working to cover our colleagues who were shielding, looking after our relatives and keeping everything going. We've experienced more harassment at work, domestic violence is spiralling, more discrimination on maternity, more women being made redundant and less likely to get furloughed. Women have always juggled competing demands, but COVID has exacerbated it and certainly shone a spotlight on it. So we must ensure unions' response reflects the priority of women workers' needs. We have stepped up to negotiate flexible agreements, hybrid work and home working, all put in place, and we've put in risk assessments to accommodate this. The government, however, has done the exact opposite. The government's announced guidance on staggered start times to reduce the rush hour transport problems. It didn't think for 1 minute or even consider how women would manage this when juggling all the other responsibilities. It never once put that into its consideration. Unite's approach to COVID-19 equality impact assessments ensure that COVID-19 changes reflect the compounded difficulties women face and accommodate them, and not show the same disregard the government has done in failing to do any equality impact audits on any of its measures, which has totally ignored all women and other equality strands. The 2020 budget failed to even mention childcare while the sector has been decimated. Public services have been starved of investment, whether it be the NHS, whether it be public transport, social care, yet billions and billions of pounds have gone into lining their mates' pockets. While we've been struggling to get together PPE, hand sanitisers while we're on the front line. Domestic abuse charities are struggling to provide services. The government has been woefully inadequate in this instance. It says jump on a train, but go where? There's nowhere to go. Releasing COVID patients to hair combs, to people, we've seen people lose family, friends. It's just, there's so much blood on their hands. It's an absolute disgrace. We need a public inquiry into this immediately. This is only the beginning of the attacks that have been made. They just keep going on and on and on. Furlough comes to an end. Universal credit cut by £20. National insurance increases, which all attack the poorest workers, attack the incomes of the poorest workers. The government calls for public services pay to be cut, the very workers that we needed the most. All of this usually impacts women workers, an absolute disgrace. Support the calls of this motion for mandatory equality impact assessments, which identify disproportionate impact on women and other equality groups, to put measures in place. It calls for statutory rights for equality reps, to put their issues on the collective bargaining table at the forefront of the trade union agendas. It calls for urgent campaign for protection against redundancy for pregnant workers and new mothers. Our union says actions, not words, on equality. No more empty slogans. We need an industrial strategy that puts women first. We need to recognise and organise and be ready to take industrial action. Our priorities must be to protect the safety of jobs, the incomes of our women workers, and this means an organisational win for all workers right across the trade union movement. So, Congress, I ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jane, and for your very kind words. So can I call on Naomi Pohl from the Musicians Union to second motion 48, please? Naomi, you're very welcome. Naomi, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm delighted to second this important motion. It feels very timely, speaking about the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 crisis on women today. Last night, the brilliant campaign group, Pregnant Then Screwed, released the following news statistics from a survey of over 20,000 parents. 2/3 of women reduced their working hours after having a baby, compared with just 26% of men. 84% of women said childcare had affected their seniority or their income at work, compared with just 58% of men. 97% of parents said that childcare is too expensive. These are statistics that reflect the general state of play for mothers, even without the additional challenges of school and nursery closures during the COVID-19 crisis. So, how have working women fared during the pandemic? The Fawcett Society reports that 35% of working mothers have lost work or hours due to a lack of childcare support during the pandemic. Mothers are 23% more likely than fathers to have lost their jobs temporarily or permanently during the crisis. TUC research highlighted that women are experiencing much higher levels of redundancy during the COVID pandemic than in previous recessions, 76% higher than during the financial crisis. Statistics also show that more women have been furloughed than men. So as the scheme comes to an end, we expect to see another wave of female job losses. For Musicians Union members, most of whom are self-employed and therefore weren't able to be furloughed, the past 18 months have been absolutely devastating. Our members lost all their work overnight, and 40% of them didn't qualify for either the furlough or the self-employed income support schemes. One of the many problems with the self-employed scheme was that periods of maternity leave affected the calculation of usual income, so mothers with young children received less money. Pregnant Then Screwed have been arguing in court that this is discriminatory, and we hope they win their appeal. During the first few months of the COVID-19 crisis, over 20,000 musicians applied to music industry hardship funds. We have 30,000 members in total, so that demonstrates the extent of the problem in our industry. For those who were homeschooling their children or who had no childcare, earning a replacement income in another sector was almost impossible. Given the majority of caring responsibilities and childcare duties at home fall to women, it follows that school and nursery closures would have had a disproportionate impact on them, and this must be properly evaluated. Women can ill afford further barriers to equality in the workplace, equal opportunities and equal pay. And that's why this motion from Women's Conference is so pertinent. And I'd also like to reference back to Gail's speech yesterday, if I might, just to say that in tackling women's issues in trade unions, it's so important to have women in leadership roles in unions. So Gail said, does having a woman in leadership in a union make a difference? Damn right it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. That's great. Thank you, all speakers. As there's no opposition, the motion is carried. I call paragraphs 3.7 and motion 49, fighting back against the international far right for LGBT plus equality. The General Council support the motion. The motion will be moved by Maria Exel on behalf of the TUC LGBT Plus Conference and then seconded by Phil Jones from Unite. So Maria, on behalf of the TUC LGBT Plus Conference, can I call you please to move motion 49?
Thank you, President. Congress, Maria Exel, CWU and Chair of the LGBT TUC Committee, moving motion 49 from our conference. In more and more countries across the world, lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people are being targeted for political gain, fueling the prejudice and hate against us. Nationalist, populist politicians pose as defenders of traditional values to strengthen their base and to gain or to stay in power. They see attacking LGBT plus people as a good way of achieving these aims. The most recent report from the EU Commissioner for Human Rights has identified this scapegoating of LGBT people, along with immigrant groups, as the main human rights threat across the continent. In Hungary, Viktor Orban's Fidesz party not only follows a vicious anti-immigrant policy to defend Christian Europe, but is also trying to co-opt faith to advance his homophobic nationalism. He has used state funds to restore 3,000 religious buildings, generously funded church schools and social care provision, in a cynical attempt to cement a church-state alliance to promote reactionary ideas of faith, family and nation. But progressive Christians and LGBT faith groups have challenged him. The Equality Committee of the Parliamentary Associations of the Council of Europe has also sounded the alarm. They've pointed out the connections between political attacks on reproductive freedoms for women and the promotion of a particularly biological fundamentalist view of the nuclear family and indeed of the world. And it's implicitly anti-LGBT and misogynist. These ideas are gaining traction in right-wing parties across Europe, including the Brothers of Italy and the Vox Party in Spain. The far-right Law and Justice Party in Poland have introduced an almost total ban on abortion rights and established what they call LGBT-free zones across a third of the country. The Archbishop of Krakow has described what he calls LGBT ideology as a rainbow plague of neo-Marxist intent. Here in the UK, we have seen rising levels of homophobic hate crime as the Tories' divisive culture war bites, and our trans and non-binary siblings are on the front line of intolerance. Shamefully, the UK is on the EU Commissioner's list, alongside Poland and Hungary, as a country where there is vilification of trans people for political gain. There's a deliberate strategy at the heart of our government run from the policy unit of number 10. This is unsurprising, given Tory links to the Trumpian networks of reactionary evangelical and Catholic billionaires in the US, Russian oligarchs, and the propaganda outlets of Spiked Online, GB News, and the Murdoch Empire. Culture wars are a useful distraction from their cronyism, evidenced in the pandemic, and their blatant undermining of democratic norms in this country. Their aim is to keep the Tory party in power and undermine progressive change for LGBT people and for women. The organised administrative, legal and political attacks on Stonewall, the transphobic legal cases taken against the Tavistock Clinic, have to be seen as part of this deliberate effort to encourage disarray. The cases are funded by those with links to organisations with a well-documented homophobic, biphobic and misogynist agenda. Those who wish to deny trans people their human rights today are the same people who legally challenged the equal rights to goods and services for LGBT people a decade ago. We can see the hand of those who pushed back against LGBT rights then, trying to halt the progress of trans rights now. Congress. As LGBT workers in the UK, we have gained greater freedom and equality over the years through activism and campaigning. We are proud of our inclusive families. We are proud of the greater visibility of LGBT people of faith, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Sikh. We are proud of the growing empowerment of our fellow trans and non-binary workers, and proud that LGBT plus MPs across all parties spoke out to support trans rights in the recent parliamentary debate during Pride Month. Congress, we reject this orchestrated campaign using right-wing money and the right-wing media to roll back our rights. They want us back in the closet and women back in the kitchen. Well, we ain't going anywhere, and we're not going to fall for Tory divide and rule. Please support our motion.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's my pleasure to invite Phil Jones from Unite to second motion 49. You're very welcome, Phil.
President, Congress. Phil Jones, Unite, second motion 49. And Congress Unite is very proud to be second this motion, and I'm personally honoured to be doing so. While most of us have been focused on combating a global pandemic, certain far-right politicians and governments have not only continued to attack the LGBT+ community, but in many cases have increased the level of their hate campaigns as they seek to use anyone as scapegoats to stay in power and continue their tyrannical rule. This is happening not only in countries commonly considered rogue or pariah states, it's happening in supposed democratic countries, countries that are members of the EU, countries that we in Britain consider to be our allies, countries such as Hungary and Poland. Far-right groups and politicians in both of these countries have been violating the basic human rights of LGBT+ people for years. In Poland, President Duda has often sought to dehumanize LGBT+ people by denying us our right to be seen as individuals, claiming we are part of an evil ideology. While the education minister in Poland has called on the Polish people to stop listening to this nonsense about human rights and equality, and then went on to say that LGBT+ people are not equal to normal people. Meanwhile, just 2 months ago, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, introduced legislation to ban any discussion of LGBT+ people in schools or in the media. Orbán's law makes Thatcher's Section 28 seem positively progressive, and we all know how damaging and loathsome Section 28 was. And last year, the Hungarian Parliament voted to end legal recognition for trans people in a piece of legislation that Amnesty International said pushed Hungary back towards the Dark Ages. A law that not only exposes LGBT+ people to further discrimination, but will also deepen an already intolerant and hostile environment. But alas, colleagues, neither Duda nor Orbán are radical outliers when it comes to world leaders. They are simply following in the footsteps of the Tsar of homophobia himself, Vladimir Putin, whose anti-LGBT+ stance has been copied by many leaders in the former Eastern European bloc. But Congress, it's not just in Eastern Europe where the far-right have been peddling their vile message of hate and division. Far-right ideologies are gaining ground across the Western world. We have seen attacks in Spain, Germany, France, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. And of course, after 4 years of Trump in America, LGBT+ hate crime there has reached an all-time high. Now, even though this motion is about fighting back against the international far right, it would be remiss of me if I did not at least touch on what is happening here at home. Far-right political parties and groups are trying to gain a foothold in our communities. They're using people's unhappiness at the inadequacies of this Tory government to try and divide our communities and set neighbour against neighbour. Comrades, we must not let that happen. Trade unions have a long and proud history of fighting against those who seek to divide us, because we all know that when the far right is allowed to gain a foothold, they attack not just one section of society, they attack all equality communities, including LGBT+ people, women, BAM communities, and disabled people. Unite has launched its own Unity Over Division campaign in response to the rise of the far right in Britain and across the globe. The campaign is aimed at equipping our officers and activists with counter-arguments to challenge the far-right narrative and to stand up for equality at every opportunity, both here at home and around the world. Congress, this motion calls on the TUC to launch a similar campaign in partnership with all of its affiliates to highlight how LGBT+ workers and allies can support our LGBT+ comrades throughout the world. Congress, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to all speakers. As there's no opposition, the motion is carried. Congress, I now call paragraph 3.9 on our equality audit for 2020. Every 4 years we produce an audit to highlight the success of unions have had in equality and collective bargaining and how we can improve in the future. The audit was conducted in 2020, but due to delays because of the pandemic, we've published it this year. The audit contains inspiring examples of the work unions do to improve equality for all workers. Some examples: increasing pay for younger workers, creating programs to support women at work going through the menopause and perimenopause, and introducing reasonable adjustment passports in workplaces to support disabled workers. I really do encourage you to read the report, and it can be found on the TUC website. For the first time at Congress, I would also like to formally move our equality campaign plan. We have introduced the plan to highlight the key themes prioritised by the TUC Equalities Conference and committees, and to ensure our campaign's priorities are viewed through the lens of equality. The plan can be found on the TUC website. Thank you very much. So we now continue with section 3 of the General Council report, Respect and Voice at Work. I will call composite motion 11, Tory attacks on our rights, defend democracy, trade unions and the right to protest, and motion 52, police crime sentencing and courts bill as one debate. The General Council supports both composite motion 11 and motion 52, and I will call the General Secretary during the debate to explain the position. So I call composite motion 11, Tory attacks on our rights, defend democracy, trade unions and the right to protest. The motion will be moved by Taj Salam from Unite and then seconded by Matrak from the FBU. So Taj, you're invited to move composite motion 11. You're very welcome.
President, Congress, thank you. Taj Salam, Unite the Union, moving composite 11. Congress, this motion, seconded and supported by our brothers and sisters in the FBU, Unison and PCS, serves to unite us in opposition to the biggest attack on our liberties in a generation. The Police Crime and Sentencing Bill seeks to neuter and silence protest. The Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill gives open license to spy cops to infiltrate and even commit criminal acts within our movements. Congress, these draconian acts seek to criminalize all those deemed intentionally causing nuisance in the pursuit of justice and change. In doing so, it casts its dragnet wide. It targets environmental activists, it targets Black Lives Matter, it targets Gypsy, Romani, and traveler communities, and Congress, it directly targets us as trade unionists. Be in no doubt that our unions sit firmly in the sight of this legislation. We know that COVID has emboldened bosses to use the pandemic to attack workers' jobs, our pay, and our hard-won conditions. Working hand in glove, the government and employers are terrified of our responses to these attacks. They fear the anger stoked over the past decade by cuts. They fear a reckoning for the injustices of their divide and rule strategies. Congress, you do not try and silence someone with a tool as blunt as this, unless you know they have something to say. And Congress, ours is a powerful voice. My union has seen firsthand, as many of you will have seen, how the state has not hesitated to intervene on the side of bosses and try to silence us. At the height of pandemic, police threatened workers at the disputes at Syker Packaging in Edinburgh and Optare Bus Builders in Yorkshire, with penalty notices and fines to break up picket lines. Let me say clearly now, we will not hesitate to defend the right to strike, the right to picket, and the right to make industrial nuisance of ourselves through whatever means are necessary. Congress, as the Tories move to strengthen the power of the state, we face living in a country where you can receive a 10-year sentence for defacing a statue. That's 5 years longer than a sentence for rape. Congress, when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. These attacks on the labor movement, on civil society, and on our communities follow infamous history. The Tolpodal martyrs, the Peterloo massacre, the Battle of Orgreave. This latest attack simply lays the Tory agenda bare, wealth and power. Attacking the rights and liberties of those seeking change comes as naturally to a Tory government as lining the pockets of those opposing that change. This is a government using the police to hold down the worker while the bosses rifle through their pockets. Congress, how do we oppose this attack on our liberty? As the motion mentions and outlines, we must mobilize. And yes, Congress, we must even be a public nuisance in defiance of these draconian acts. We must not stop there. We must rip up the anti-union laws, which try at worst to shackle us, or at best leave us to fight the bosses, attacks with one hand tied behind our backs. We must take this fight up politically, and we must not shy away from it industrially. We will not accept draconian government any more than we will accept dictatorship in the workplace. We will oppose their attacks, but let the Tories be in no doubt. They can pass whatever laws they wish, but they will be rendered little more than scrap papers in their ability to stop us defending our members. Congress, never forget our roots. Let us remember now that a historic task of our movement is, to quote the Tolpodal martyrs, to raise the watchword liberty. Congress, I call on you to support this composite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taj, and for that historic reference. I next call Matt Rack from the FBU to second composite motion 11. You're very welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Presidents and Congress. It's a great privilege to follow Taj in this debate on this important composite about an important attack on our civil liberties and our ability to organise to defend ourselves. And this attack from this government is no accident. They know that they intend to force working people to pay the price of their crisis. They know that that will prompt resistance, and they want to limit and attack our right to resist. And that's what this is all about. And we make no hesitation there. We have no hesitation in being clear that this needs to be attacked, and our movement needs to unite to defend the right to protest, to defend and extend trade union rights. The right to protest is essential for democracy. The right to protest is what won many of our democratic rights. The right to vote was won through people breaking the law and taking direct action. The abolition of child labour, the right to oppose war, exposed so sharply in recent weeks with the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the exposure of a 20-year failure of military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, the right to support ourselves in strikes. So protest is an essential part of what we do. And these attacks through the current proposed legislation are a threat to our class. They are a threat to trade unionists. They are a threat to climate activists. They are a threat to homeless people. They are a threat to black people and to black activists and those campaigning against racism. They are a threat particularly to the Gypsy Roma traveller community. And they will, of course, allow the rich and powerful to go unchallenged. That's the whole agenda that we faced here by resisting our ability to challenge those in power, our bosses and those in government. We need to remember also, mentioned in this composite, that our unions remained shackled, and there are laws, as has been said. We demand the repeal of all the anti-union laws. We need to demand the unshackling of our unions. And I remind Congress of existing policy that says workers should be represented by an independent union, strike or take industrial action by a process at a time and for demands of their own choosing, including in solidarity with any other workers and for broader social and political goals, and to picket freely. Those are the demands this union, this movement must set out in the face of the attacks that we face. And let's remind ourselves of some of those battles. When we've won the freedom for the Pentonville Five, when miners took strike action in support of NHS workers in 1982. And of course, the famous case of the Rolls-Royce workers at East Kilbride, who took action to prevent engines from arming the Pinochet regime in Chile. All these are acts which would be unlawful today, but we don't apologize for them. We don't apologize for our history of solidarity. No, we take pride in our history of solidarity that has won such progress over the decades and throughout the history of our movement. We also know, and we know in the FBU, that we have been spied on by undercover police officers. We've been spied on for our trade union activities, but we've also been spied on because we take part in anti-racist and anti-fascist activities. And the latest attack in the guise of the Covert Human Intelligence Resources Bill would license the extension of those attacks on our rights to protest, our rights to organise, and enable the role of undercover policing to spy on us in those undemocratic ways. So the ruling class in this society and across the world has a long history of attacking and undermining democracy. We have had to fight every step of the way in this movement, and those who went before us, every step of the way to demand the right to vote, the right to organise in trade unions, the right to education, the right to a health service. None of these things were given to us. They were all campaigned and fought for, including on a...
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Matt, but I've tried to give you leeway. We're quite a bit into extra time. Could you draw your comments to a close, brother, please?
Gail.
So, Matt, is that, have you drawn your comments to a close?
I was finishing as you spoke, Gail.
I'm going to move on, Matt. That was a smashing speech, and I think we get the drift of the end. Forgive me. We've got. I've given people a bit of leeway on time, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a bit more of a stickler because we do have business to get through. So I will be a lot more strict on the 5 and 3 minute rules. So. We have other speakers in this debate. Karen Reisman from Unison, you're very welcome. Karen, you're on mute.
I'm not sure how to unmute. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Karen Reisman from Unison. Great pleasure in supporting this motion. We've heard in the last couple of days in conference so many attacks on ordinary working people as the Tories and employers try and make working class people pay for the mess that they've made. And the need for protest has never been greater. We already have some of the most restrictive anti-trade union laws in the world, and they're deliberately designed to limit our ability to resist. And now we have the police bill and the spy cops bill. Not only do they criminalise and threaten the existence of Roma gypsy life, but they give more powers to police and courts, which we know are institutionally both racist and anti-working class. And that's reason enough to oppose the bill. But crucially, these bills put severe limitations on our right to protest. The Tories suggest that that's a response to Extinction Rebellion and to Black Lives Matter. But let's be clear, this affects us all, including, my speech has gone. I don't know where it's gone. Apologies for that. Let me find. I'll have to finish it off Pat. But, you know, we know that this is going to limit our ability to protest. We know that even sort of, you know, stupid things like making a noise, one person, if it causes a severe nuisance or a severe disruption and inconvenience to people, you can serve up to 10 years in jail and unlimited fines. And as trade unionists, we know when we go to picket lines, we say to people, make some noise, because that ability to act collectively together is what we need to do in order to win. We know that we have to not just go on strike, but we have to have demonstrations, we have to have protests, we have to go to the places where they sell the products that we make. And I think that makes a real difference. It makes a difference to our ability to fight back. And sadly, we have more and more restrictions on what we can do. I know, I'm a health worker. When they brought out the 1%, we organised a very safe risk assessed protest. I got a £10,000 fine, and it was only because I got solidarity and my solicitors took them to a judicial review and threatened it that they withdrew that fine. And that was designed not for health and safety. They didn't care about that. Thousands of people have died. It was to stop other people protesting. And we know we have more need to protest, and we need to not just oppose this bill with the right to protest, but we have to say we need more protests. We need to be more of a nuisance. We need to inconvenience this government more if we're going to win the workers' rights that we need, that are being decimated all around us. Very glad to support this motion. Very pleased to be acting in solidarity with the other two before me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. So the last speaker supporting Composite Motion 11 is Sarah Morton from PCS. Sarah, you're very welcome.
Thank you, President, Congress. PCS is deeply concerned about the ever-increasing authoritarian nature of the Tories' programme since they came into power. With an 80-seat majority, the Tories have a clear route into Parliament to expand on their deeply troubling legislative agenda. The bills that are already making their way through Parliament are a clear and direct attack on our democracy, our civil liberties and the right to protest. The relentless authoritarianism we've seen isn't just happening in our workplaces and at the ballot box. Some of the most desperate people on the planet seeking safety and refuge here in the UK are being targeted. Asylum seekers and refugees haven't been spared from the Tories' immense cruelty. Just last week, Priti Patel announced plans to turn back migrant boats found in the Channel. This callousness is staggering. Pushbacks of boats crossing the Channel have been widely condemned when carried out elsewhere in Europe, with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees calling for a halt to the practice earlier this year, branding it simply illegal. Their struggle is our struggle, and we must continue to challenge this ever-increasing authoritarianism where we find it, because protest is a trade union issue and a fundamental principle of democracy. Across the world, every day, trade unionists lead the charge in challenging state violence and corruption, fighting for employment rights, for human rights, and securing justice for themselves and others who've been mistreated and discriminated against. Protest is firmly embedded in our movement, and the fight for equality, justice, and freedom is at the heart of everything we do. Earlier this year, we saw the state's violent response to protests in cities across the UK, when women gathered to collectively grieve and protest against gendered violence after the brutal murder of Sarah Everard, and the violent response to Black Lives Matter marches. These unacceptable responses to protest will be supported and further strengthened by the provisions of this bill. Our amendment to this motion makes it clear that as trade unionists, we need to be ready for the coming attacks on our movement. The Trade Union Act has been devastating for PCS and everyone who's joined us here today virtually. The Tories are reported to see this act as unfinished business and are keen to finish what Thatcher started. It's vital that all of us here today galvanise ourselves for the important and difficult battle ahead. We need to face the political realities of today. The Tories' substantial majority means we cannot rely on Parliament. The real fight will take place in workplaces up and down the country, and so unions have to take the lead. The injustices inflicted by this authoritarian government have already been felt across workplaces and across society. In the face of this oppression, unions should be at the forefront and take the lead in fighting to right these wrongs. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to all the speakers in that debate. I call paragraph 5.6 and motion 52, Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. The motion will be moved by Bob Jeffrey on behalf of the TUC Trade Union Council's Conference. Bob Jeffrey, on behalf of the TUC Trade Union Council's Conference, I call you to move motion 52.
Thank you, President. Bob Jeffrey, UCU and President of Sheffield TUC. Congress, the preceding composite, which of course I support, clearly has a good deal of overlap with motion 52. But nonetheless, I have an obligation to represent the view of the Trades Council Conference on this issue. Now, as we've heard, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill represents a clear threat to our civil liberties. It allows for new stop and search powers that have historically been used disproportionately against our ethnic minority communities, new surveillance powers that have been used disproportionately against trade unionists, and a redesignation of trespass that will be used disproportionately against our gypsy traveller comrades. Nevertheless, it is the provisions under Part 3, which would entitle the police and the Home Secretary to sweeping new powers to restrict protest rights, that are perhaps the most chilling. A crucial amendment to existing legislation is the ability to impose restrictions on protest due to their location or potential to cause a nuisance, even if this relates only to noise levels. Now, Congress, organised labour in this country has historically achieved a great deal for ourselves, our members, and the social justice movements of which we...
We've not had that before. We've not had a screen freeze yet, so I'm not quite sure.
I think we're back. When we supported our campaigns for democracy in the early 19th century, when we allied with the suffragettes in the early 20th century, and when we march in solidarity with Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matters in the 21st. Here in Sheffield, only last July, our Trades Council and its Sheffield Needs a Pay Rise campaign, in partnership with the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, used a noisy and disruptive protest to force a multinational fast food firm, Papa John's, to do the right thing and cough up £10,000 plus in unpaid wages when one of its franchisees shut up shop and disappeared in the night. We use protest to win for workers left exposed by the measly tatters of employment protections that exist in contemporary Britain, practically unenforceable as a result of regulatory cuts and a tribunal system weighted in the employer's favour. Our Trades Council has also been a supporter of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, which continues to fight for a public inquiry into the state violence meted out to our miners and their supporters in June 1984. Working class justice campaigns like Orgreave not only face the insult of justice denied, but now the risk of being criminalised simply for taking up the fight. Congress, these are just two examples, but every year trades councils across all four corners of the UK are engaged in similar actions, supporting affiliated unions in industrial disputes, protesting against service closures, exposing gender pay gaps, standing shoulder to shoulder with people of colour and confronting the far right, advocating for action against climate change, campaigning for a proper welfare safety net, speaking out against militarism and the exploitation of workers around the world. This government thinks they can legislate away the solidarity that is the backbone of the trade union movement, that they can criminalise people's empathy for their fellow humanity or their hatred of injustice. They are sadly mistaken and they will not succeed. Nevertheless, we must make this Tory government pay for the affront of tabling such a bill in the first place. We must work in our local communities with the trades councils to develop broad coalitions in opposition to this bill. We must work with the Labour Party and any other allies we might find to stop the bill from being enacted. And if the bill is enacted, we must fight tooth and nail to contest its implementation. I move.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob, and I admire your cool. You weren't thrown by the frozen screen. Well done. I formally second the motion. Finally, I call the General Secretary to explain the position on both Composite Motion 11 and Motion 52. Francis, you're welcome.
Thank you, President. This General Council explanation refers to both Composite 11 and Motion 52, both of which set out policy in opposition to the Police, Crime and Sentencing Bill. The General Council is in general opposed to the Police, Crime and Sentencing Bill for all the reasons set out in the motion, and the General Council's recommendation is to support both the comp and the motion. However, a number of our unions support the measures within the bill to double the maximum sentence for offenders who assault emergency workers, something in fact we would wish to see applied to all key workers as per USDOR's campaign for freedom from fear for shop workers. The TUC will make its support for these measures clear while campaigning against the attacks on fundamental rights that this bill represents.
Thank you very much, Francis, and thank you to all speakers. As there is no opposition, Composite Motion 11 and Motion 52 are carried. We now move to Section 4 of the General Council report, Public Services, the section on privatisation on page 50. I call paragraph 4.5 and Composite Motion 14, Defending Public Service Broadcasting and Saving Channel 4 from Privatisation. The General Council support the Composite Motion, moved by Paul Fleming from Equity. You're very welcome, Paul.
Thank you, President. Congress, much attention is paid, quite rightly, by our movement to the government's dismantling of state support for healthcare, social security and education. But less attention is paid to arts, culture and entertainment, which have equally suffered under austerity and privatisation. When we have that focus, we often turn to subsidised theatre, arts education and the BBC, all who have suffered at the hard end of cuts. But with the efforts of trades unionists spread across so many battles, the government is taking the chance on an overlooked strand of our welfare state, Channel 4. Beyond the normal, vacuous and disproven rhetoric of privatisation matters. However, the debate over Channel 4 and public sector broadcasting is moving towards something more concerning: the silencing of diverse opinion, challenging stories, and a mixed economy in culture. This is government censorship through the profit incentive. It is important to recognise how the Channel 4 model works. Simply put, Channel 4 is funded by private revenue, but owned entirely by the state, and any profit is reinvested in programming. It costs the taxpayer, the state, the audience nothing, but its mission is non-profit public service, not the profits of shareholders or media moguls. Channel 4 is in robust financial health, despite an ever-changing media landscape, and its model has triumphed in recent years. And for Equity members, this is vital. Only a terrestrial channel with a commitment to pushing the boundaries will lead to innovative stories, diverse and representative casting in the mainstream. The platform Channel 4 provides means real investment in independent producers who go on to make more work, and over 90% of UK drama is made on a union agreement. A privatised Channel 4 is likely to rely on rehashing existing shows and importing American TV, comedy and drama. Let's remember that over the last 18 months, 40% of Equity's 47,000 members have been excluded from any furlough or self-employed income support through the pandemic. And these were disproportionately women, black workers, disabled workers and our working class members. Disproportionately the demographics who benefit from the innovative and inclusive casting that Channel 4 should stand for. For audiences, Channel 4 is a bastion against the growing creative chasm between the haves and the have-nots of subscription services. We've moved as a country from the universal provision of terrestrial channels, building a shared experience of culture and TV, to an expensive new two-tier. Sky, Netflix, Apple, Disney+, Amazon, they're only available to those who can afford them. By diluting the incentive of challenging programming to the altar of the market, Channel 4's service will lose any reason to fully engage with the costly process of scripted commissioning. This all amounts to a silencing of different voices, not through government action, but through inaction. Abandoning a channel designed to support a complex, independent broadcasting ecology to the same old vested interests. But this disinterest needs action to kickstart it, and a secretive panel will decide the fate of Channel 4. It has not been set up under Cabinet Office guidelines, and it will be a shadowy pack of hyenas carving up their prey. Congress, Equity is asking trades unionists to join us in a campaign to protect the very best of Channel 4. Our asks, however, are not just reactive. The undermining of the freedom of public service broadcasting to push boundaries demands a new approach. Support for our motion from our whole movement will kickstart a democratised vision for what public service broadcast should mean. We want to see control passed from government boards to the workforce and to audiences. We need to see more work pushed out of London. We need as much work as possible for our historically excluded members and audiences in dignified, modern storylines. We need to see a defence against that growing creative chasm caused by a proliferation of streaming services. Voting for our motion makes a bold statement about what ordinary working people, both in the arts and as audiences, deserve. We deserve broadcasting for public service, not private profit. I commend the motion to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Next up to second Composite Motion 14 is Pierre Vickery from the NUJ. Pierre has chosen not to put his camera on. I think we're going to formally second. I beg your pardon. We're going to formally second Composite Motion 14. So thanks very much to Paul for moving the motion. As there is no opposition, the composite motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, that completes our debates for today. As mentioned, unfortunately, we don't have time to debate all the motions submitted this year. I'll therefore formally move the outstanding motions. Section 2 of the General Council report, the economy, I call paragraphs 2.11 to 2.15 and motion 34, creative workers touring the EU, submitted by the Musicians' Union. The General Council support the motion. Section 3 of the General Council report, respect and voice at work, I call motion 38, ending harassment and abuse of journalists, submitted by NUJ. The General Council support the motion. I call motion 39, freedom to disconnect, submitted by the Royal College of Podiatrists. The General Council support the motion. I call paragraphs 3.8 and 3.10 and motion 46, time to stop sexual harassment in schools and colleges. It's no joke, submitted by NEU. The General Council support the motion. I call motion 47, breastfeeding and returning to work, submitted by the RCM. The General Council support the motion. Section 4 of the General Council report, good services, I call paragraph 4.7 and motion 63. Reunified probation service needs investment and motion 64, CAFCAS in crisis. The government must act now. Both submitted by NAPO. The General Council support the motions. As there is no opposition, all these motions are carried. Now, colleagues, I'll announce the results of the ballot, for the General Council and for the General Purposes Committee. So if colleagues could please turn to the back of your agenda, and I'll give the results of the ballot for sections C and D of the General Council and the General Purposes Committee. Firstly, I'd like to draw your attention to a change in the nominations in section A. GMB will be nominating Fazana Juma instead of Robbie Scott, and Unite will be nominating Sharon Graham instead of Len McCluskey, following her recent election as General Secretary. The members nominated for sections A, B, E, F, G, H, I and J are otherwise as printed in the agenda. The votes cast in the ballot for section C were Jed Nichols Accord, 185,000, Brian Lynn Aegis, 202,000, Simon Weller Aslef, 181,000, Sarah Woolley, BFAWU, 113,000, Dave Penman, FDA, 182,000, Michelle Stanistreet, NUJ, 101,000. Mark Dickinson, Nautilus International, 199,000. Martin Furlow, Royal College of Podiatry, 217,000. Manuel Cortez, TSSA, 158,000. I declare Jed Nichols, Brian Lynn, Simon Weller, Dave Penman, Mark Dickinson, Martin Furlong, and Manuel Cortez elected to Section C of the General Council. The votes cast in the ballot for Section D were Sarah Woolley, BFAWU, 744,000, Annette Mansell Green, BDA, 878,000, Jane Loftus, CWU, 918,000, Naomi Paul, MU, 371,000, Sue Ferns Prospect, 775,000, Fran Heathcote, PCS, 613,000. I declare Sarah Woolley, Annette Mansell Green, Jane Loftus, and Sue Ferns elected to Section D of the General Council. NAS UWT have withdrawn their nomination from Section H. Therefore, Dave Allen is elected unopposed to Section H of the General Council. The votes cast in the ballot for the General Purposes Committee were Sharon Wild, GMB, 5070,000, Michelle Rogers, RMT, 492,500, Katie Harwood, Podiatrists, 559,000, Tony Wilson, Unison, 5084,000, Linda McCulloch, Unite, 5215,000, Dave McCrossan, Usdaw, 5022,000. I declare Sharon Wild, Michelle Rogers, Tony Wilson, Linda McCulloch, and Dave McCrossan elected to the General Purposes Committee. Colleagues, we now have a short message from our sororal delegate from the Labour Party, the Chair of the National Executive Committee, the Right Honourable Margaret Beckett MP. Margaret has served on a number of key government and shadow government roles, including becoming Britain's first female Foreign Secretary in 2006. She is a lifelong trade unionist and a great friend of the TUC.
We all know that there's a social care crisis. And the other day, I heard someone who's an expert in the field talk about interviewing carers about how they saw the problems. One care worker said to me, "This is the only time anyone has ever asked for my opinion, except, of course, my union. That's why it's an honour and a pleasure to be asked to give a sororal address to your Congress. Particularly appropriate at a time when your President and General Secretary and leaders of two of the biggest unions, including my own, are women. But it's a particularly important time for the Congress and for the Labour movement. It seems to me that we have seldom had a government that understands less about the lives of everybody else, of all of us in this country. Seldom had a government less in touch, without any relevant experience, and frankly, less interested in the real lives of ordinary people. And that's part of the problem, because if you don't understand the impact of what you're doing on people's lives, you're more and more likely to get it wrong, especially if your values, and I'm afraid your heart, are probably not in the right place. There's a second reason why, to me, it's really important that we have and maintain these strong links. And to my mind, it's always been your voice on behalf of your members, which has been crucial to your relationship with the Labour Party. But it's particularly crucial now. As I look at what the present government is doing, it seems to me that almost stealthily, so many things about industrial and political circumstances today remind me of what I've read about the days when people like Ernie Bevan were starting the union to which I have the honour to belong. People not knowing whether they'd have a job or not, hanging around to wait and see if they could be hired, not knowing what income they could have, whether they could put food on the table. Far too many families in this country are experiencing that kind of thing all over again. And the government says, Tories say all the time, the best way out of poverty is work. Of course, that's true. But we all know the many, many families in this country where people are in work, not doing just one job, but maybe two or three, and still not certain of being able to put food on the table, care for their families, pay their rent, never mind have any peace and security in their future. And against that background, the government is taking steps to undermine some of our most basic freedoms. Legislation is currently before the House of Commons, which follows in the footsteps of Donald Trump and his like in America, in making it harder for people to vote. There's no evidence in this country of the problems that they identify needing to be addressed. But what there is evidence is that the more difficult you make it for people to go and vote, the more likely it is that people who probably might not vote Tory are the ones who will be dissuaded. And I understand that it's envisaged in this legislation that somebody like Michael Gove will be able to decide whether a campaign that you ran was a valid one or not. Decide maybe even whether there are criminal concerns about something a charity may have done, something a trades union may have done. This is very much taking us back to some dark times and with some very real dangers. Having government ministers, frankly of any shade, able to interfere in what's a valid campaign is quite frightening. But it's not campaigning that brought the political wing and the industrial wing of this movement together. You're very good campaigners, you always have been. But you founded the Labour Party because you found out the hard way that industrial and workplace success could be wiped out by the stroke of a legislative pen. And there again, we're back in that ballpark, we're back in that game. You didn't set up a Labour Party so that you could have Labour MPs in the House of Commons to speak for you, although that was obviously much better than when working people couldn't get any representation. But you set up the Labour Party because you realised, and again I say, you found out the hard way, that you need to be able to have a chance to have people in government who can change that framework of legislation in ways which take away the obstacles you face in your workplace campaigning. Now, we We've never always seen eye to eye. We probably never always will. But broadly, our values and our hearts are in the same place. We want better lives for the people of this country. We want better for our families. We want better for the country itself. And heaven knows we can do better than the government we've got now. Thank you for listening.
Well, thanks to Margaret for taking the time to address us. We'd normally present a gold badge to our sororal delegate, so we will of course make sure she gets a gold badge at a later date. Now, that completes Congress for today, but there are still lots of online fringe events taking place which you can attend, and please do visit our online exhibition. You can get the details on the TUC website. A record of all decisions taken during this year's Congress will also be available on the TUC's website. Congress is adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Please do watch tomorrow. We'll be joined by Keir Starmer and be celebrating the winners of our Congress Awards. You can join via the same link if you're watching the live stream. So thank you all, delegates, thank you, Congress, thank you all, viewers, and see you tomorrow.